the untold story of America's most famous serial killer. The cold November air clawed at the edges of Aspen, Colorado, as police lights washed the snow-covered treetops in a warning glow. It was past midnight when Deputy Rick Miller stopped on the trail, his breath hanging in the air like ghosts rising from the ground. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The footprints he'd been following had suddenly ended, as if the man they belonged to had simply evaporated into the mountains. But the deputy knew the truth. Ted Bundy was gone. And the world had no idea how close it had come to a disaster that night. The story of Ted Bundy, America's most notorious serial predator, has been told countless times, yet there are parts the public never learned, fragments buried behind closed doors, sealed case files, and investigators who still refuse to talk. His charisma and deceptive normalcy weren't just a facade. They were weapons, crafted over decades of psychological evolution. To understand how he became who he was, investigators had to look far beyond the crime scenes. They had to dig into his childhood, his identity, and the moments where everything shifted. Ted was born in 1946, raised in a world wrapped in secrets. His mother, Eleanor, told neighbors they were siblings, not mother and son. The truth was hidden, whispered, and rearranged until even those closest to the family weren't certain what to believe. As Ted grew older, he clung to these fractured stories like shards of a broken mirror, pieces that never fit together but cut all the same. People who knew him as a child described a strange duality. There were moments when Ted appeared quiet, polite, and unusually mature for his age, then other moments when he would stare at someone a moment too long, as if studying something only he could see. One teacher later recalled a drawing he made in primary school, a house with no windows, no doors, just solid walls. He said it was where people go to hide, she once told reporters. But he said it in a way that made me uneasy. In high school, Ted tried desperately to reinvent himself. He learned how to mimic charm, wearing it like a mask. Teachers praised his intelligence, classmates admired his confidence, and Ted became skilled at giving people exactly what they expected to see. But behind closed doors, his private life unraveled. Academic struggles, social failures, and identity confusion he never shared with anyone. Investigators later found letters he wrote but never sent, revealing a gnawing fear that he was broken inside. By his early 20s, these fractures deepened. Ted met a woman who embodied everything he wanted: elegance, stability, wealth. She introduced him to a world he'd always admired from the outside. For a moment he felt whole. He imagined a future, a normal one. But when she ended the relationship, quietly, suddenly, without closure, something inside him shifted in a way no one noticed. Not yet. Years later, she would confide to a detective, "It was like I was staring at a man who had two faces, and he didn't know which one belonged to him." This breakup became a turning point. One investigators believe triggered a psychological collapse mixed with a growing obsession with control. It was the beginning of a path no one saw forming, not even Ted himself. Fast forward to the moment he moved to Washington State. Charming, intelligent, involved in politics, even working at a crisis hotline. A coworker once said Ted had a strange calmness about him, especially when the calls turned disturbing. He had a way of speaking that made people feel safe, she recalled. That's what scared me later, how natural it was for him. Everything changed the night a missing persons case crossed the desks of Seattle detectives. A young woman had vanished near Lake Sammamish. Witnesses claimed they'd seen a man with a sling asking for help loading a boat onto his car. The name he introduced himself with sent a chill through the room when police heard it. Detectives reviewed a composite sketch. A clean-cut young man. Neatly combed hair. A polite smile. It looked like every man and no man at the same time. Clues began piling up: car sightings, university campus reports, witness sketches that resembled Ted a little too closely. But Ted had an airtight public persona. Political campaign volunteer. Law student. Friendly neighbor. Investigators were torn. Some felt he matched the description perfectly, while others said he didn't fit the profile at all. Then came the breakthrough. One detective found an old photograph from Ted's campus days. In the background, almost invisible, A young woman stared at him with a look of familiarity and fear. A detail hidden for years. Investigators still debate what it meant. Was it coincidence? Recognition? Or the earliest sign that Ted's facade had begun to crack long before anyone realized? The chapter of Ted Bundy's untold story that the public rarely hears is not about the crimes, but the transformation. How a fragmented past, a ruptured identity, and a carefully constructed public persona converged into one of the most disturbing criminal profiles in American history. And just when investigators started to piece it together, a discovery emerged that changed everything. 6 words scribbled in an old notebook. Words that hinted Ted wasn't acting alone. And when they opened the locked basement door, what they found changed everything. The basement smelled of dust, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of forgotten tools. Detective Laura Briggs stood at the bottom of the wooden stairs, her flashlight cutting through the shadows like a blade. She had followed Ted Bundy for months, interviews, witness sketches, endless files, but nothing had prepared her for this. The notebook. It lay on a workbench, brittle and yellowed, its cover cracked from age. But it wasn't the notebook itself that froze her. It was the handwriting inside. Ted's handwriting. Controlled. Almost elegant. But the dates written at the top of the early pages were from years before Ted had moved to Washington. They aligned with periods of his life that were supposedly quiet, uneventful, normal. Periods when investigators believed nothing had happened. Laura flipped the pages slowly, each turn echoing the weight of an accusation no one was ready to make. The entries were brief, coded, strange, lists of places, initials, observations, and emotional outbursts he'd never shown the world. Some pages held only a single sentence, but each one carried a chilling implication. She saw the real me. They don't understand how easy it is. Control is the only truth. But one entry, dated years later, stopped her cold. I wasn't alone then. I'm not alone now. Her heart thudded in her chest as she read it again. The ink was deliberate, steady. Not a scribble. Not a moment of panic. A statement. And suddenly the possibility unfolded before her. Someone else had been there. Someone who contributed, encouraged, or watched. Someone who might still be watching. Before she could process the implications, footsteps echoed from overhead, another detective rushing down. Briggs, he whispered sharply, breathless. You need to see this. Now. She followed him upstairs and out the side door into the cold morning light. Patrol cars formed a scattered semicircle around the yard. Officers whispered. Radios crackled. Something had rattled them. At the edge of the property, 2 officers stood over a series of fresh tire tracks in the dirt. The prints were deep, recent, and pressed sharply into the ground. A car had been here. Last night, one officer said quietly. Maybe even early this morning. Laura's pulse quickened. Ted's car? The officer shook his head. Not even close. She looked at the tracks again. Different pattern. Whiter treads. Someone else had arrived before the police sealed the property. Someone who knew where to go. Someone who knew exactly what to take. And that's when she realized the notebook was incomplete. Entire sections had been torn out neatly, the edges sheared in clean, straight lines. Whoever had taken the pages had done it quickly, intentionally, and with purpose. The missing pages weren't random. They were the ones that mattered. Back at headquarters, the tension was suffocating. Word spread fast. Supervisors argued behind closed doors. Phone lines lit up with pressure from higher offices demanding answers. They all knew they were sitting on something explosive. Laura pushed deeper into Ted's background. She traced old roommates, former classmates, political coworkers, even people he'd volunteered with. Most were shocked he was even a suspect. Others confessed they always felt something was off. But none of them pointed to an accomplice. Except one woman. Her name was Karen Lewis, a former law school classmate. When Laura found her, she appeared calm, almost too calm. She invited Laura inside, offering tea like they were old friends. But the moment the detectives brought up Ted, Karen's demeanor cracked. I haven't spoken to him in years, she insisted quickly. We were never close. But her eyes told a different story. Laura pressed gently. Did he ever mention someone who influenced him? Someone he trusted? Karen hesitated, fingers tightening around her cup. There was someone, she whispered. A man he kept in contact with. I don't know his real name. Ted called him the advisor. He spoke about him like a mentor. A mentor how? Laura asked. Karen swallowed hard. Not academically. More like emotionally. As if this person understood him better than anyone. Someone who knew what he was capable of. Laura felt her stomach twist. And you're sure this advisor existed? She asked softly. Karen nodded. Yes. I met him once. The room fell silent. Karen's voice trembled. He made me uncomfortable. There was something in his eyes, like he was evaluating me. Not as a person, more like I was a variable in an equation. I never forgot that look. Laura leaned forward. Do you know where this man is now? No, Karen whispered. But Ted admired him. He said the advisor taught him how to see people for what they really are. I didn't understand it then. Laura did now. The notebook. The missing pages. The tire tracks. The coded phrases. Someone else had shaped Ted Bundy, not to commit crimes, but to manipulate identity, emotion, and control. Someone who had seen potential in him long before anyone else recognized the danger. Back at the precinct, Laura returned to the notebook. One page she had overlooked earlier now vibrated with new meaning. At the bottom, written faintly in pencil. My advisor said there will always be someone waiting in the shadows. Watching. Learning. Becoming. Laura felt a cold wave roll over her skin. Ted Bundy was behind bars now. But the shadow mentor, the one who had been there before the crimes and possibly during, was still out there. And then the radio on her desk crackled to life. A detective's voice, trembling. Briggs, we just got another call. Same pattern. Same signature. And the suspect was seen leaving with a man who doesn't match Bundy's description. Laura's heart stopped. The advisor wasn't just real. He was active. And waiting. Snow drifted in slow, silent waves across the Tacoma police lot as Detective Laura Briggs slammed her car door and sprinted toward the briefing room. The call from dispatch hadn't left her mind for a second. Another abduction, witnessed by two people, and the suspect seen driving away wasn't Ted Bundy. He was already behind bars. The room fell silent when she entered. A satellite map glowed on the projector screen, marking a location near the Oregon border. Two officers stood beside it, their expressions tight and drained. Witnesses? Laura asked. Two hikers, an officer replied. They saw a man guiding a young woman toward a tan sedan. The hikers shouted at him. He didn't run. He just stared at them, like he wanted them to remember his face. Laura felt the unease settle like a stone in her chest. And the woman? She asked. Gone. By the time local units arrived, the car was already miles south. Another detective flipped back through earlier reports. The description of the second man is vague. Late 30s to mid-40s. Clean-cut. Expensive coat. No panic, no urgency. Just watched the hikers and then drove off. Laura closed her eyes for a moment. Ted had been 32 when they arrested him the first time. He'd built a persona of intelligence, control, and charisma. Someone older, someone who had molded him, guided him. That person would be everything Ted admired and imitated. She opened her eyes and spoke quietly. He's not just an accomplice. He's a strategist. That morning, Laura returned to the evidence room. The notebook lay sealed in its plastic cover under fluorescent lights, looking almost ordinary. She lifted it carefully, flipping to the sections with intact writing. There were patterns she'd missed. Ted rarely wrote names. He wrote initials, symbols, arrows, time stamps, psychological observations. One page caught her attention again, a page she had skimmed before, thinking it incomplete. But she had missed the faint indentation across the surface. Someone had written on a page now torn out. The impression remained on the page beneath it. Laura tilted the notebook under the light. Lines appeared. Words formed. Not fully visible, but enough. Tell him to meet at the overlook. Only observe, never engage. The student becomes the mirror. Her breath caught. The advisor had left instructions. She photographed the indented markings and brought them to the forensic imaging team. Hours later, when the reconstructed text appeared on the screen, the room went silent. The missing page contained a date, a location, and one chilling sentence. He will test himself there. I will watch from the passenger seat. One officer whispered, passenger seat, that matches the hiker's report. For the first time, the theory wasn't a theory anymore. The advisor was real. He traveled with Ted. He watched from the shadows. And now, with Ted imprisoned, he was continuing something neither investigators nor psychologists had ever documented: the psychological passing of a legacy. A man teaching another man how to become invisible. Laura stepped out of the analysis lab, the weight of the revelation pressing into her spine. She needed answers, anything. She called Karen Lewis again, hoping to shake loose another memory. Karen's voice on the phone trembled. I remember something else, she whispered. I didn't think it mattered at the time. What? That advisor. I saw him once near campus. He was sitting in Ted's car. In the passenger seat. Just watching students walk by. Not speaking. Not smiling. Just watching. Laura felt her heartbeat spike. Do you remember what he looked like? Karen exhaled shakily. His eyes. They were cold. But not angry. More like he was studying people. Evaluating them. Age? Build? Any detail? Older than Ted, Karen said. Lighter hair. Clean dressed. He looked like a professor, not a criminal. Laura hurried back to the board of witness sketches. Her eyes scanned through the composite drawings of Bundy's sightings from years earlier. One detail jumped out now, something investigators had written off. Wait until you see what happens when the next one starts. Hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started.